Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a special call session tonight. Rutherford County School Board. The first order of business before we get down to other business is our Pledge of Allegiance, led tonight by Tennessee School Board Attorney Randall Bennett.
Thank you. Would you please stand and join with me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The only and major business that we have tonight, of course, is the beginning work with the Tennessee School Board Association on the selection of, I believe, 4 candidates. And you have a book in front of you that has each one of their names there and the date that they will be interviewing. And Mr. Bennett is here to help us out, go through a few things, and answer any questions. Mr. Bennett, as always, sir, welcome. Glad to have you with us.
Thank you very much. Now, there's 5 tabs in your notebook. The first tab has got a lot of good information, and I don't want to waste time on that now because when I do it, people are going on reading the names of the recommendations that we're making anyway. So let's just go ahead and start with tab number 2, and let me tell you a little bit about the candidates, and I think you're going to recognize some of them. Our first candidate, and by the way, they're listed in order of interview. That's the only reason they're listed that way, because I've talked to all of them. They've agreed to interviews on certain dates, and so that's why they're in the order that they are. Mr. William Spurlock will be coming to talk with you on Thursday night. If you're going on looking at his resume, he's got an extensive amount of experience. Of course, as you know, he's principal of Oakland High School. Been assistant principal at Riverdale. Also, he was science teacher at Oakland High School and taught at Smyrna as well. Also taught a special ed teacher in Whitfield County, Georgia in the late 80s, and also in Fort Oglethorpe in Catoosa County, Georgia, back during that time. He has a bachelor's, a master's, and an EDS from Middle Tennessee State University, and we recommend him as one of your finalists. Moving on to the next tab, you will see the name of Dr. John E. Ash. Mr. Ash has actually been in a superintendent search of ours before. And if you go ahead and look on over at his curriculum vitae and educational resume, of course you all know that he is at one of your premier schools here in Rutherford County, principal of Central Magnet School. And as you know, I don't bother telling you the awards they've won because you know what they are better than I do. But as you know, it is an award-winning school. He's been adjunct professor at Middle Tennessee State. He was principal at Christiana for a while. Also assistant principal at Laverne. Did the summer school there, and he basically taught some courses at Laverne High School prior to that. Also at Brentwood High School in Brentwood, Tennessee, and some teaching at Tennessee Tech in Cookeville. He is the second candidate we've recommended to you, and he is scheduled to interview on March the 14th. Our third is someone from right here in central office, Mr. Richard Zago, Jr. Looking at his resume, you will see that he has also had extensive experience in education. He's been the assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction basically since 2012, I believe. That's when Mr. Odom left that position. He took over soon after that. He's been principal at Stewart's Creek Elementary School, also at Smyrna Elementary School in Smyrna, and also assistant principal at Rock Springs. He teacher in residence at TSU, and also 4th grade teacher from back in 1995 to 1998. He's been to Middle Tennessee State. He has a bachelor's and a master's in education from there, and he is scheduled to interview on March 19th. And of course, all the references to these folks are listed there too, some folks you can look at. Our final candidate is scheduled on March 21st. It's Dr. Ann Garrett. Now, Dr. Garrett, you don't know, but I did a lot of investigating on Dr. Garrett, and I talked with my counterpart, the North Carolina School Boards Association, and I was basically given an unqualified recommendation for this person. She has been currently from 2004 until March the 1st. She retired March the 1st from the position that she's in. She has been the superintendent of the Haywood County School System in Waynesville, North Carolina. For those of you that know North Carolina, it's the extreme western portion of North Carolina. I-40 runs right through it on its way to Asheville. So it's a beautiful community over there. It's where Lake Junaluska, North Carolina is located, if any of you are Methodist and ever go to that Methodist center there, which I am and I have. She was also a principal, associate superintendent there, and a principal at an elementary school, 2 elementary schools, director of federal programs, and was elementary and cultural arts supervisor. She's a publisher. If you look over on the next page, she's published a number of books. As I say, the recommendation I got from the person I know in North Carolina was unqualified, and I've known this person for a number of years, and I'm very impressed with her, and if she recommends her as strongly as she was recommended, I think that y'all would benefit from talking to somebody like her too. And she is scheduled, as I said, for March the 21st. So these are our recommendations, and as I say recommendations, I stress that they are our recommendations. You as the Board of Education have the option of accepting our recommendation and interviewing these folks. You have the option of modifying any recommendations we have. You have the option of saying, we don't like any of your recommendations, come back and talk to us again, look through it all again. So I'm at your pleasure now as far as what you want to do. But what I'd like to do for a few minutes while you're thinking about that is to go back and look behind tab 1, if we could do that. There's a couple of things I want to talk to you about. Basically, the first part of this is the history that brought us to this point, but I want to call your attention to page 4 in tab 1. These are the criteria that you ultimately decided on, and these are what we based our selections on. Our selection committee take a look at these criteria, they read them over, they understood them, and as we were looking at the different candidates that we had, we were measuring them against this criteria. So that always figures into our decisions. A couple of words about the interview process. Starts on the next page. There's some things that you should and shouldn't do in an interview. Basically, I assume you're going to interview here in this room. My suggestion would be to comfortably seat a person at the table with a microphone, so everybody has a microphone, everybody can see that person, and then ask the questions back and forth. Obviously, you don't want someone standing for what may be a 2-hour interview. We don't want anybody passing out on you. We want people to be comfortable just like you are and give you the opportunity to sit and everybody observe. It might be that you want to move this podium out of the way so that folks on this side don't have a problem with it. But I think a comfortable interview is important here. Now, as you move into the interviews, looking over on the next couple of pages, you need to think about being objective. You'll see that list on page 6. Being objective, everyone should be asked the same question, and I know that after I finish tonight, you're going to talk a little bit about the interview guide, and that'll ultimately your decision. That's what you're going to make too. I sent you a copy in the notebooks, and I know you've already seen this, of what I sent you earlier as far as suggested interview questions. And again, this is not set in stone. This is something that we sent to you based on the criteria that you adopted, some questions that will help you get to the heart of that criteria. And you may look at those, you may use some of those, you may delete some of those, you may modify some of those. So I understand you want to do that, but the interview guide is there as a guide for you to take a look at and make a determination as to which ones you prefer to use in the interview process. So make sure that once you come to that decision that each and every person is asked the same question in the same order. And by the way, the interview guide that I sent you, I sent to all the candidates. So they've had a chance to look at what we recommended to you too. I think it's the only fair way. It's the only fair way that you can have the first person coming in and having an interview. That first person needs to see those questions, and the person who's coming in last would have the opportunity to check out the coverage and the newspaper coverage, TV coverage, things like that, and it would give them an unfair disadvantage. So making sure that everybody has the questions that we recommend to you beforehand. And I told them, I said, you know, these are questions that we're presenting to the board, but the board will make the final decisions on which of these questions that they use. And I know that you all have been working on questions too, so that's something that you'll have to decide. Probably wouldn't be a bad idea to get that out to the candidates, although 3 of them are here, and they'll know, I think, just basically because you're going to be doing this in a public meeting, so it shouldn't be a problem. But I would formally get those out to them too ahead of time. Follow-up questions are things that that might pop up in the answer to one of your initial questions that just piques your interest. You might want a little bit of clarification on something like that. So that can be happening. All the follow-up questions are not necessarily going to be the same for each candidate, because they're going to say something in the response to one of the questions that you decide on that you may want more information on. You may have, it may pique your interest. You may want to say, well, I'd like to follow up on that, and can you tell me a little bit more about what you just said here? So that's generally the only wild card in the interview process, is that each candidate's going to answer something differently, and sometimes those answers will spark follow-up questions. Otherwise, you start with the same main questions. Any questions about that? Because I know that, you've got to figure in for that just a little bit of flexibility. Ms. Moore, you look like you had a question. Okay. Yep. You were just taking a breath. I thought you were taking a breath of speak. Take notes as we're doing this. And as you know, we've given you some other documents that you can use for each candidate to get your impressions, take your notes, things like that. If you're like me, it's hard for me to read my notes about 15, 20 minutes after I actually write them on paper. So be brief and try to keep them legible so that you can figure out later what you were questioning and some of your conclusions are. Are you looking at a 2-hour window for the interviews? Is that?
If possible, yes.
Okay.
Sir.
So I know you're going to eat from 5 to 6, and then you're going to interview from 6 to 8. So, and I think when you do that, obviously you don't want to use all of our questions, because that would take you well past 8 o'clock. And I think you're going to have to come to a point where you all narrow down and approve a final interview guide. So, and that's something that, I can't recommend to you, because as far as what to do there, because frankly, that's going to be what this board as a body decides it wants to do. So going forward, you're going to have to pare down our questions and decide your own questions and how you're going to do that, and get that into some sort of cohesive interview guide so that you can treat everybody consistently.
Let me just go ahead and interrupt you here, and I apologize.
No problem.
What we have agreed on 3 questions each, and if they come from your list, that's fine. They can also, any board member can replace 1, 2, or 3. All 3 questions with questions of their own. Ms. Michaels and I, when we get through here tonight, I think we have everybody, right, Ms. Michaels? We have everybody's questions. So the ones that they write down themselves, they will ask them if it's 1, 2, or 3. Otherwise, Ms. Michaels and I will divvy them up, and I don't care. So I didn't even turn anything in, because I'm going to take whatever's left over. So, and they voted as to what they thought somebody should ask.
Okay.
So that's kind of where we are right now.
All right, that sounds good. Sounds like you're well established in that process.
I hope this works.
Yeah, I think it will. Looking over on page 7, talks a little bit about the interview process. One of the first things you want to do is to establish rapport. And one of the first questions in our interview guide is basically, tell us a little bit about yourself. Just kind of a generalized thing. And I think you can tell a lot from something like that. So do establish a rapport, set the stage, let the candidate know what you want to accomplish in the interview, how you're going to go about it. It takes some of the anxiety out of it. Probe the significant areas in the history. If there's anything in the candidate's resume or history that you've got questions about, you should ask at that particular point in time, at some point during it. And then at last, when you're finished, close the interview and ask them if they've got anything else to tell you that might be important, and during that time, again, take copious notes going forward. Be careful in the use of listening responses. If somebody's saying something and you're sitting there going like this, that response, they're going to think, ooh, I've got an ally over here, and they're going to start focusing on that person. So try to Mount Rushmore. Try to be like Mount Rushmore. Don't give away what you're thinking. Don't nod, don't make casual remarks or something like that. So just open your ears and listen and react personally as far as your notes go, what you want to do. Some things that people do sometimes, they'll agree with the candidate. Yeah, I agree with you on that. Now, that's all well and good. You might tell them that later, but I think in the first interview process, you don't say that. Don't necessarily be over complimentary of any of the candidates. Don't sympathize with them. Yeah, that sounds rough. It may sound rough, but just don't sympathize. And don't try to play down the importance of unfavorable remarks. If they make a mistake, that's on them. It's not on you. So, you know, it is what it is. You got to maintain control of the interview and be careful not to make quick first impressions. I know that you know several of the people that we're recommending tonight, but the bottom line is you don't necessarily know them for this job. And I think you've got to approach them like you really don't know them, because they've been, obviously, all of them have been successful in what they're doing. I think you need to approach this about what it's going to be like if this person is chosen superintendent. So it is a new interview. Even though you know them, you don't know them from that aspect. So keep that in mind, too. If you all don't control the interview, the candidate will. If I came in here and sat down and interviewed with you guys, if you gave me an opportunity, I would take control of the interview, because that's just who I am. And most superintendents are like that. People that are potential superintendents are like that too. If they sense that you're not in charge of the interview, they will fill the leadership vacuum. They want somebody to be in charge. So you control it. Let them know you control it. Don't ask questions like, can you, or this, that, or the other. Be cautious. You want to ask broad questions. And if you look at our questions, most of them are very broad-based. They're saying, give us examples of X, of how you've done this, things like that. And the whole idea is for you to talk a brief amount of the time and hear what they've got to say in depth. So if you ask those kind of open-ended questions, that will be more helpful to you as far as what you're going to do. Looking over on page 10, I put the EEOC employment guidelines. There are certain things that you cannot ask. Those are included in this handout. And I also gave you a list of questions when I sent these questions to you of some things that you might ask instead of these questions if there's certain things you want to get to. And that's something that we did not develop, that I just found online recently, and I kind of liked it. And you're the first person that I've shared it with. So take a look at that. It will help you. And Ms. Moore, I know that your background is doing this, and if you've got any comment about any of those questions, if you think they're not good ones, I would suggest that you share that with your fellow board members too. Looking on over, as far as the sample schedule for the candidate visit, we've got one person from out of town, so we've got some time to think about this. These are some suggestions that we've made as far as how to do that, as far as the timeline goes. And if you ultimately want to go visit a community or something like that, those guidelines are included in there too. And the final page in this section, page 16, is a candidate reaction form. Once it's all over and done with, a nice, concise candidate form like this, printed copies for each one of them, would give you an opportunity to jot down what you like best, what questions or concerns do you have, and then any other comments that you might want to make to the board when you get back together to deliberate how the vote's going to go. So that's my quick run through of this, and let me stop and see if you've got any ask any questions about this report or anything else like that, because I know you've got other things to do tonight that really don't include me. So you tell me if you got any other questions for this, anything that you might want to ask me about while I'm still here.
I want to explain to the board, when you and I talked last week, I asked you how many candidates you had tonight. You said 4. And I didn't ask you who, and you didn't volunteer it, which was fine. I didn't want to know anyway. But we did discuss the tour thing at your request, and because the out-of-state candidate had a travel problem, right?
Yeah, I did tell you we had an out-of-state candidate.
Right.
That's all I told you.
Yeah, you told me
we had several that applied.
And I believe you set up a tour for her if she wants it or not.
I would recommend it. I think when Ms. Michaels contacts this particular person, I would talk to her about the schedule that you'd like to have and leave those details to her.
And she did select a date. No, she didn't. You told me that there was a date that she was available. My
mistake when I saw what we had talked about originally, you had the interviews just down for 1 week. And I'm thinking, that's going to be tough for you guys, but obviously you spread them out over a period of time, and I didn't realize that until I talked to Ms. Michaels about what the interview dates were going to be, and that easily fit her into that last interview slot. That was not a problem. It was a week before that she had the problem.
Okay, so if Ms. Michaels is going to call her, and she's going to call all the candidates,
right?
I don't know if these local people.
Yeah, any of the things that you need to set up, I think you need to make the same call to everybody, make sure they understand the process, what you're going to do. I think it's just common courtesy in a situation like that.
The candidate, the out-of-state candidate. The date for the tour is the 21st.
Yes, I would think so.
Theoretically, I guess she could come a day early if she wanted to, or whatever she wanted to do. But anyway, I don't know who'll conduct that tour, but right now it looks like it's going to be myself and Ms. Moore both going to go now. Obviously, we also discussed this. If any board member wants to go, that's fine. I'd hate to have an entourage going through a school making this candidate nervous, but if any board member wants to go, they can go. Board, he asked for questions. You
got a lot of area to cover, too.
Well, I imagine, Ms. Moore and I hadn't really talked about it, but I imagine we'll pick the high school.
Get the highlights.
And the middle school and an elementary school. And I don't know, we're not that far down the road yet. Mr. Blair?
Mr. Bennett, when you were here the last time, of course, we had a good number of candidates and several from the district. And I know the committee is anonymous. Can you just kind of briefly remind us of that selection process again with the committee?
Basically, you know, we do calling on all the candidates. We sit down, we share the information. We look at the criteria, what you've approved, as far as people that have been successful in their job and, you know, have the kind of supervisory experience that we think is transferable to the superintendency here. And based on that, you know, we made some choices just based on that. There were some other interesting candidates in your selection. I've got, you know, kind of went back and forth on them. Not everybody on our committee necessarily agreed that some of those candidates, but these were people that all the members of the committee did agree on.
Yeah, of course, your committee is anonymous, and you explain.
Except for myself and Dr. Grissom, it is, yes.
Right, and just a little bit about their background, former director of schools.
Former directors of schools, people involved in statewide issues, higher education, you know. We like to rely on other superintendents as well, too.
Thank you.
Board? Yes.
Mr. Bennett, I guess I just, you know, we've talked a lot about this as far as the timeline, and I'm looking at one of your recommendations here in the report. It says at the conclusion of the interview, which should be precisely the time scheduled. Recommendations or guidance at all on how to make sure that we keep it on track? I mean, I'm just thinking this and the timeline, and 3 questions apiece, that's 21 questions for the candidate, and you ask for elaboration or, you know, clarification on things, you know, kind of follow-up type questions. Is that based on your experience with director or superintendent searches? Is that going to work?
Not with that many questions.
That's kind of what I thought.
I think you're going to have to look at your questions and pare them down, and I've got no recommendations based on that. I think that's something that you all as a body have to decide. But I think with, well, you've done interviewing, I would think that any one of your questions could spark a 10 to 15 minute response, depending on what the question is. And so then you got to start figuring just exactly how much you're going to be able to cover, because I would rather cover certain things and do so in depth as opposed to getting just quickie responses to a lot of questions.
Well, that's why when I went through the recommended questions from the TSBA, I kind of picked my top for each of those different criterion, because the criteria obviously are all important. So, but yeah, I'm concerned about how long it could run and staying on track if we ask that many questions.
Some boards will do interviews for a couple of hours, break for dinner, and do a couple of more hours. Some boards do, not everybody. Some boards do it much quicker than that, do it faster than you're going to do it. It just depends on the situation and the board members. But my recommendation is that you want an opportunity to hear these people speak in depth on questions that are the most important to you. And if anything else doesn't fit in that category, push it to the side. We're not married to any of our recommendations to you. We think that all of our questions will elicit open-ended and somewhat lengthy answers, which is what we really want to do, get to the heart of it. But I think based on, I don't know what your questions are, so that's, you know, kind of up to you as to which ones you want to do. And if you don't want to use any of our questions on a particular criteria, that's also fine too, as long as you all are getting the information that you need to make this decision.
We talked about 3 questions and how much time that could initially take. And I thought, I didn't bring this up in the discussion, but I thought, well, suppose we put a 2-hour cap on it. Let's just say we did that. At the end of 2 hours, we're done no matter where we are. Well, if you ask the first candidate 16 questions and the next person only gets 12, then you haven't asked every candidate the same questions. So that's a problem, because that's exactly the opposite of what we said we would do. Yeah. So I'm not sure where to go here. And I was troubled by the 21 questions, but I didn't know what else to do. And I thought, well, we'll try 21, but we may be here half the night. If we can't get a candidate, can't get everybody to be brief and clear, we could be asking for trouble. We may be here a lot longer but we want to get a good feel. We don't want to give up on, and I know you know all that. I mean, we want an honest evaluation of that person.
Absolutely. I think it wouldn't be unusual for, I know that you each submitted 3, but to look at your 3 questions and think, is there one that is more important to me than any of the others? And pare down your own questions to begin with, and then look at our questions, and you think to yourself, is there any question here that I think I really want to hear? And then pare it down into something much more reasonable. And I think, and I can't give you a number for that, because some questions, I can say, well, you could do X number of questions, but that depends on the question. Because some questions will definitely elicit longer answers than other questions will. And I think in the beginning, it's a good idea just to have some basic, general, quick questions that they can ask. Tell us a little bit about yourself, so on, your philosophy of this, that, and the other. And I think those would be good. And then you start, once you break the ice with that, you can start getting into the meat of the matter with the more detailed questions.
Board? You ever had a school board get to a situation where they were absolutely deadlocked, couldn't decide?
Not if they didn't have an odd number of members. But I remember a situation in Granger County many years ago. There were 5 districts in Granger County, and each district had 2 school board members, which meant a 10-member board. And there were 2 internal candidates, and the board was split 5 to 5 on these internal candidates. And the interesting thing was that they were split in each zone. There was one for each candidate in each of the 5 zones. And it went on for, I even had the county mayor call me at TSBA, or had her secretary call me. And they said, well, Miss So-and-so was just wondering about this. She wanted to know if there was anything she could do. And I said, well, she might as well get a bag of popcorn and sit back and wait till somebody blinks, because there's really nothing. The Board of Education is going to have to come to that decision. Now, if you've got 7 people, you've got the built-in option of having a majority in most cases, unless somebody chooses to abstain, and then you leave 3 people on each side. But no, I have seen that happen, and it went on for 3 or 4 months until finally, I think, somebody did change their vote. And the successful candidate, I think, was grateful that it was finally over, and if I'm not mistaken, he put the other person in as an assistant superintendent. But it took a while. So anywhere you've got an even number of board members like that, the potential exists for the split. But it rarely happens when you've got an odd number like 7, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. Makes it a little bit easier. Almost a guaranteed majority with that.
Board? Questions from Mr. Bennett? Thank you.
I will leave you to it, and if you have any additional questions for me, just give me a call.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett.
Thank you.
Ms. Michaels and I, when we get through here, we're going to go over the questions, and I don't have any idea really which, I know you sent 1 or 2 of them to me, but she has them all except mine, I think, and you have, if a person is asking something that's not in, you've got a copy of that. If it's a question that's not on Mr. Bennett's sheet. Yes. Okay. Okay. So we're all right there. And I intended to give these to you all tomorrow night. as to what to ask. Now, the agreement, I think, that we kind of came to was to decide what was being asked. If it's off of Mr. Bennett's sheet, we'll just take them in order and go through there and do that. But if it's your question that you wrote down, one of yours, then obviously you've got to ask it, and because nobody else will have a copy of it, and it's your question. And you remember too, brevity, clarity, and that we must ask every candidate the same questions. And he even said the same order. I hadn't thought about that, but I guess the same order. Now this is not until Thursday. And that'll be Mr. Spurlock on Thursday, and we can discuss, I guess, tomorrow night kind of what I have in mind as to how to go about this. But it's not going to be, you know, I wouldn't call this a difficult thing, particularly if we'll all read tab 1 and be familiar with that and keep me on the straight and narrow, which would be appreciated. I think we'll be in pretty good shape. Now would be a good time to iron out any problems. The only reason I asked him how many he had was I was hoping it would be 4. And that's what I was hoping, because of just simply because of the number of dates, and the 5th date was a Friday. And when he told me 4, I thought, well, you know, that's probably good. I don't know, but it probably is. But we don't want to rush through this process or try to finish and have everything done by a certain date or anything. Let's just do a slow and steady good job. We ought to come up with a good director. Waiting for other comments or questions.
Mr. Chairman, if board members have their own questions, are we going to be privy to those before the interview? I mean, will everyone have an opportunity to look at the final list of questions that are going to be asked?
Well, yes, I guess we can do that tomorrow night. I can give you a copy of your questions.
Well, all the candidates are going to have all the questions.
Off of Mr. Bennett's list, yes.
I mean, they're going to have our questions as of tomorrow, correct?
How are they going to do that?
Well, I would think we would send...
He did mention that, didn't he?
It would be an unfair advantage.
I agree. Yeah.
So
yeah.
we need to send all the candidates.
It would be a disadvantage for the first candidate that interviews, because they won't know them, whereas the rest of them will, because all they have to do is watch the previous candidate's interviews. So
okay.
Different with it being public.
We can send all the questions to each candidate. Seems fair to me.
And let us have a copy of them when you send to them.
So if there are more questions than we've determined that there's going to be time for, to keep the interview at a reasonable time range like we've discussed, how are we going to go about whittling those down? What's the criteria that's going to be used?
And I don't know really how we want to go about that, unless we want to revise 3 to 2 and just go to 2 questions each. And that's the only way, unless we set a cap. But if we set a cap, a time limit on the interview process, and then we've got a problem there. We could have a potential problem there.
It's taking longer with one question.
Right.
Perhaps it never does.
Right. Any ideas from anyone on that?
Chairman, could I recommend that we might look at taking one question from each category from what they're suggesting here at TSBA, and then each board member picks their one question that they'd like to ask.
That's not on the list.
It's not on the list.
Okay, that would be 2 questions each. Or you could write down 2. You could have 2 of your own.
Well, yeah, I mean,
That'd be all right.
yeah, you could. I just don't know if you're gonna have enough time to get through.
That's still just 2 questions, though.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just saying, if I wanted to Yeah, I didn't want to use the list. I could
Okay.
write down 2 questions. That would be all right.
I would agree with 2.
Do we need a motion?
Well, I think we probably do. Okay, I think if you just say 2 questions, I think that's probably enough of a motion. And we'll just keep in mind, they can be your questions, or questions off of his list, or a combination 1 and 1.
That
Is that
decision
okay?
made tonight, though.
Yeah.
What? No, I'm going to pick up, well, I'm going to pick out one off this list of one that they circled or whatever they did with them. And then if they have another one, they're going to tell me, and you've got a copy of it. And I'll take the first one off the list.
Well, Mr. Chairman, since we've all given you and Ms. Michaels 3 questions,
Right?
how about just deleting one and let each of us have 2 of the questions that we desire to ask?
Okay, I'm really confused now.
Well,
Sorry.
I gave Ms. Michaels and you 3 questions. Delete one of my questions and let me have the other 2 for me to ask.
Okay,
Assign me my 2 questions. Assign Mr. Young or Mr. Holliday. Assign everybody their 2 questions.
all right, we can do that.
Or just pick your 2.
That's going to make it a little bit more difficult, but,
You got your list there, just pick your 2 tonight.
yeah,
I mean, I think we're making this thing a little bit more difficult
maybe,
than what it is.
maybe. After we adjourn, just see Ms. Michaels, and if you've given her a list of questions that you wrote down yourself, delete one of them. Just cross through it. Okay? That's all right. That'll work.
I think you compile that list and get it to them sometime in the morning, would be my guess. Get the list to the candidates. Because the one that's going Thursday night, got 2 days to prepare for it.
Well, that was our intent. Get them out tomorrow, as well as any tours possibly. Okay, we are going to need a motion.
Make a motion that we go down to 2 questions per board member. Thank you.
A second.
Okay, comment, discussion from anyone? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed to that? Okay. Other issues, comments, reactions, Mr. Bennett or otherwise? Come on now, I said this meeting would take 40 minutes and we're at minute 38, so somebody's going to have to ask something.
How much time are you going to give the candidate to talk about themselves?
Well, I really hadn't thought about it, and I hadn't read these until now, okay, and just perused them then. So, but clearly we've got to get, we've got to get started and get into it pretty quick. I hope to make them comfortable and that sort of thing, and let them know that they're welcome here and et cetera, which they certainly are, and particularly our out-of-state candidate. And then I'll start the questions somewhere, and it was my intent. I'll do whatever y'all want me to do. It doesn't really matter to me. Mr. Reed, you want to?
At some point before you adjourn the meeting, you need to adopt the people you're going to be interviewing. If you're going to accept the recommendations from TSBA, you need to take some board action to decide who you're interviewing.
Okay, we need a motion for that effect from somebody. That we take these 4 people.
I'll make that motion.
Mr. Young has made that motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
I believe that was Mr. Estes. Are there comments or reactions from anyone? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed to that? No.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, may
Yes.
I ask a question of Mr. Reed?
Yes, absolutely.
Mr. Reed, I know we have to ask each of the candidate applicant the same question. Do we have to stay in order, or can the chairman move that order each?
You should stay in order to be fair to all the candidates. So whatever sequence of questions you choose on should be asked the same to each candidate.
Okay. All right.
Okay, not to overcomplicate, because I don't want to.
No,
but
don't. Please don't.
I do think that I really think it's appropriate for us to determine the questions together as a board, and let me explain to you why. First of all, you know, we've hired the TSBA, we've paid them this money to make their recommendations based on all their years of experience and expertise. And as I went through all of these different criteria and the questions that are in them, I think some of them, if not all of them, are very, very pertinent. I would hate to see us disregard these questions for ones that individual board members, and again, not saying I'm sure that we've all come up with our own good questions, but I really would be a proponent of making sure that we stick to the criterion areas that they've recommended by at least having one of the questions that the TSBA has recommended out of each of those 10 criteria be the ones that were asked. And I realize that would limit how many we could have that would be individual questions that the board submitted. But frankly, and you saw from my email that I sent you that I didn't even come up with an original question because I felt like what we'd been presented with here from the TSBA was very, very sufficient. Now, were there some that I liked better than others that I thought were more appropriate for our search? Absolutely. But I think we should take one out of each category. I don't know if I need to make a motion. I just think we need to leave here tonight with an understanding of what those final questions are going to be. I mean, it was my understanding that that's part of what we were tasked with doing tonight. Am I wrong?
Now, Ms. Moore, I'm not sure that I understand. You want us to vote on every individual question there and select one for you to ask off of that piece of paper?
Not necessarily. I'm just saying that I think we ought to take at least one of their recommendations out of each criteria as a question to ask. Honestly, I don't care what question I ask as long as we're all comfortable that we're asking the right ones.
Okay, but didn't we indicate on the papers that she has which ones you thought were the most important?
Yes.
So you're going to have one of those. Well, you're going to have, since we're only going to do two, you're automatically going to have something that most people in this room thought was important, was an important question. We're not going to ask something that nobody circled and nobody thought was important.
Right.
Or one of the most
also
important.
given the opportunity to submit individual questions too, correct?
Right.
That's why I'm asking if there's a possibility that there are going to be ones that might be a priority, again, with the criteria that they've set for each of these different kind of divisions that might get left off that would be important. Are you going to somehow rank them, and we can't rank them if we don't know what those other questions are? Yes, I've overcomplicated.
Oh, yes, you are, most certainly are. But I'm not saying that means you're wrong. That just means you're complicating it. I'm not sure how we could do that, short of starting over again with the questions. You gave me 6. And so you're automatically going to have one of those.
No. And I'm not concerned about what specific question I ask, just that we make sure overall that we ask the ones that are the highest ranked by everybody. And I thought that's kind of what we were doing.
That is what we're doing. That's exactly what we're doing.
For instance, if I'm just looking at criterion 9 and question number 2 on that criteria, if you had 6 board members say they thought that was a good question, whereas the other one on criterion 9 maybe only had 1 or 2, that's how it would be.
That is what we're doing.
Determined. Okay.
We're going to do that.
Where are the individual recommendations from board members that may have been submitted to you going to fit into that, I guess, really is the question.
Okay, well, if they want to ask one of those, and as Mr. Hodge said, we can revise, we can talk to Ms. Michaels here, and you all can take one of your questions off, or actually 2 of them off. Now, we would be for taking 2 of them off if we're going to take one from that sheet of paper right there, which is fine. I don't really care, but if that's what we're going to do, then you can only write one question on your own. That, Mr. Blair's motion did not cover. He just said 2, and he limited to that, which I thought was going to be okay, but evidently it's not okay. And
We all submitted 3 questions.
what?
We all submitted at least 3 questions.
If you wanted to. You talking about your own questions?
Just questions.
Okay.
Either we picked from the suggested criteria or we came up with our own questions.
Exactly.
My perception is at the end of this meeting that we will get with Ms. Michaels and I will share with her the 2 that I am most passionate about that I chose. It will be what I chose. So that's the simplest.
That's the way we are right now.
That's the simplest.
That's not what Ms. Moore wants,
But
which is fine.
I don't know that we're going to be able to get there because the 3 that I have, I like. So, but I'm going to call it down to 2 that I like.
Okay. Well, okay. Ms. Moore, if you want to make a motion that we have one question off of Mr. Bennett's list, and it'll be one that many in this board wanted asked by somebody, and then if the person wanted to, one of their own questions, you need to make a motion to that effect. And we'll still have 2 questions. I think that's what you want, rather than.
And it may be that it works out exactly like Ms. Moore wants it to, once Ms. Michaels has an opportunity to.
We'll go ahead and leave it the way that you've got it. I mean, I didn't come up with any questions, again, not because I didn't have them, but because I felt like what was presented from the TSBA very, very well covered most of the ground. So
I agree with you on that point. There's a lot there. I would agree. And you're reading one, and you think, well, that's important. And then you turn the page, you say, well, oh, wait a minute, that's important.
There's a ton of them that are appropriate and would be great to answer, but that's only if you have an interview process that goes from 8 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock in the evening.
Covers 2 days.
Yeah, it's a good suggestion. I just don't think we can get there.
That's okay. I mean, I'm fine with the way that you've got it in 2 questions each, as long as I'm comfortable knowing that the ones that are being recommended off the TSBA's list that we're, if we do have to call them down, that we're going by who had the most interest in that particular question, if that makes sense.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
Who has seen all the questions from the board members?
I'm sorry?
Who has seen all the questions from the board members? Is there any 2 questions the same? I mean,
I have
am I
no
asking
idea.
the same question
I
Mr.
don't know.
Blair's asking, or?
I don't think so.
Okay.
You don't think there's any repetition?
Not off the recommended list. Is that what you're asking?
No.
No, on the individual, I know what, no.
Okay. That would be the only issue I would see that might come up if we all pick our 1 or 2 questions.
And if somebody has a question, the same question I have, I will just select one of the other ones that I chose. So it'd be redo.
I had to shoot my mouth off about the 40 minutes, didn't I? Now I've been 48 minutes, so clearly I don't know what I'm doing. Then, any other comments or anything? Anything else anybody wants to say? We get together tomorrow night with our work session, and then Wednesday with the regular meeting, and then we're back with a candidate interview, which will be Mr. Spurlock on Thursday night. All of them at 5 o'clock, right? Well, the dinner is at 5. 6 o'clock. Okay. If there's nothing else, pausing for effect. Thank you so very, very much. Thank you, staff. We are adjourned.